Hello and welcome to this Tuesday morning briefing from Hearts Standard. My name is Joel Sked and I am delighted to be joined by Scott McIntosh of Amoruso Let's It Run fame. I'm guessing only there's three people that you can say that about: Stefan Adam, Lorenzo Amoruso, and yourself, having taken the line.
Yeah, I do get confused for a Rangers fan quite a lot. There's quite a lot of sort of ignorant football fans out there. It does get me into more bother than it's probably worth at times. I've thought about maybe changing the Twitter handle to something a bit more on the nose, maybe. But it's good.
You've got to protect the brand now.
Yes,
So we are here to answer more questions. So last week, James and I did a question and answer session, and it was we got loads of questions in, and there was loads left over. So I thought, why don't we just answer them? Get Scott on. James is currently in France, so kicking things off, most relevant, pertinent one is helps if I get the person who said it. Groat Hill 1874. Does Craig Gordon go straight in when match fit, or does Xander keep the jersey? Worry is there could be a drop-off in performance from Craig after what he's been through plus age. So how are you feeling about that, Scott? Do you, when fully fit, would you be bringing Gordon back into the fold?
I think there's sort of two ways of looking at it. I think if you look at it on a purely sort of stats-driven sort of basis, you could argue that prior to the injury, we recorded 2 clean sheets last season, both away from home in the same week. So we were struggling defensively even when Craig was in goals.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I think that's all down to him? No, I think there was issues with us playing a particularly bad high line when we're defending a lot of set plays during last season. We seem to have fixed that. So we've went back to a sort of 50-50 in terms of zonal and picking up players for our set plays. Does seem to be bearing fruit in terms of, looking at the stats. We're a lot better out of possession now as a collective team as well. So I think if he was coming back in, he would be coming back into a more settled system, albeit the personnel keeps on changing due to some of the injuries that have been mentioned over the past few weeks. You then look at it in terms of ability, and there really is no question. He has to come in. I think there's also a case to make that bringing him in, making him captain again, would potentially either maybe loosen the shackles that are potentially on Shanklin just now. It would maybe sort of help his performance as well. So I think there is a case to say that he does come straight back in, albeit Xander Clark has been an able deputy. But I think just purely based on ability, Craig has to come straight back into the team.
Yeah, the big one is when I spoke to Gordon a few weeks ago, we had that conversation where it was like, for a goalkeeper, you need to be 100% fit. You can't. He doesn't want to go in. He can't go in where if he's 80%, 85%, and kind of build fitness as maybe an outfield player can do. Just because the position he's in, you can't take any risks. You need to be able to be 100% to spring to your right or left, get down to shots, be able to kick, be able to run out of goals and sweep up. So it's getting to 100% fit. He obviously took a massive step in his recovery when he played against the Spartans on a behind closed doors game at Tynecastle. He seemed to get through that absolutely fine. Enjoyed being back out in the pitch. Had to go. Said he was going to take a few days off and then get back into it. So the good thing is that, like you said, we've got Xander Clark, who he's had a couple of mistakes this season, but in terms of his shot stopping, he's been really reliable. And you just go down to if both are fit, who's the better goalkeeper? It's Craig Gordon. The Groat Hill, we made the point about worry about his age. I genuinely think he's going to play until he's 45. I think he's got that mindset. He'll have seen Scotland qualify for Germany, and he's realised this is a fantastic opportunity to get back into the Scotland fold as well. If he can get back into the starting 11 and perform to the standards we know, then you look at we're defensively sound. We'd be even more defensively sound when you have one of the best shot stoppers that Scotland has ever produced behind the defence as well. So really, when it comes down to it, if both are fit, and yes, would feel for Zander Clark because he's been a solid player. But when you have your best players available, you play your best players, and Craig Gordon's our best goalkeeper. I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah. I think that's a fair shout. It's true what you're saying though about maybe gradually having to get back into fitness. And I think the good thing is because our form has been on the whole pretty decent this season defensively, we don't need to rush him back. I think there's a case to say that it can wait till probably potentially maybe even the next international break, and maybe just trying to get him in maybe after that. I think the next few weeks, I think we're fine with what we've got. And when you play the Old Firm, there's so much of it's just down to luck and them having an off day. So I think it's too early to push them back in for these next run of fixtures. I would probably be looking at maybe 5-6 weeks down the line before you see them.
Yeah, I think that I did want to add that is putting them in. Just chucking them in straight away, maybe not the ideal scenario, especially if there's a semi-final coming up. Although I think he had his eye on the semi-final, which he'll have seen the chance of getting Hearts to a League Cup final is something he would be wanting to tick off, because we know he's very much he's the type of person who wants to reach get these accolades and do everything he can for Hearts. So yeah. It'll be interesting to see if he is back in in terms of back for selection for the League Cup semi-final if Naismith goes that way. Move on to the next question, and it's from Scott Foley. Do Hearts have an inferiority complex when it comes to the Old Firm? And if so, how do we change that mentality? He believes, Scott firmly believes that Hearts do have an inferiority complex against the Old Firm. This is a very pertinent question because we play Celtic, then Rangers, and then Rangers again after playing Livingston at Tynecastle. So we've got the Old Firm in the next 3 of our next 4 games. I put up a stat on a Saturday as part of a piece. We have, out of the last 60 games against Old Firm, so 30 against Celtic, 30 against Rangers, we have lost 47, I think it was, and had won, I think it was maybe 8. So we had a 13% win ratio, which is terrible.
Yeah, I think you could, first of all, I think you could probably widen the question out and cover Scottish football in general.
Yeah.
I think there is certainly a bit of a complex there. It's something that managers have commented on when they've came into the Scottish game. I seem to recall Paul Heckingbottom making quite a big deal of it when he came into Hibs. He was really sort of perplexed as to why there was this sort of, I think it's more of a mentality issue. I think the problem that stems from the Old Firm games is that from the fans' point of view, they hate to see teams sort of sitting in, parking the bus. They want to see their teams be sort of more proactive in these types of fixtures. I generally don't think it really matters too much how you set up from a tactical point of view. I think first and foremost, you need to get your team to believe that they can get something out of the fixture. And I think too often there's players, particularly who are born or raised in this country, who kind of feel the weight on their shoulders of this type of fixture because of what they're constantly sort of conditioned into thinking when it comes to the Old Firm. And we kind of do put them on a pedestal in terms of the mainstream media. So I think that probably has a bigger bearing than the tactical side of it. I think ultimately what you require for these fixtures is a huge amount of luck. You need your players to be on form, and you need probably a good 6 or 7 of their players to be having an off day. So I would probably quite like to see Hearts approach these fixtures in a more proactive sense, because ultimately Rangers and Celtic will actually play into our hands to a certain degree. Our biggest issue this season has been when we've been in possession and how we break teams down with that low block. So I'm not really concerned about these games. I'm not going to say that they're a free hit, because I don't think such a thing exists. You can get, in terms of your morale, it can take a bit of a nosedive if you get a particularly harsh sort of beating off of one of the Old Firm. So it's not quite a sort of free hit, so to speak. But I do think that there's an opportunity here, given the way that we've played and sort of set up this season, to take something from it. But again, it boils down to mentality. I definitely think there is a bit of an inferiority complex. The only time I've really seen Hearts address it, it's probably, if you look back to that initial spell when George Burley was at the club. He'd been away from Scottish football for a good 15 years by that time. And I don't think he kind of carried that maybe respect or too much respect for the Old Firm. Now, you do have to add that we had players of a better standard as well. So that did kind of help itself. But yeah, I definitely think in general, Scottish football has had this problem for quite a few decades now. And I'm not quite sure how you address it apart from, try and instill that belief in the players that they can get something. And I do believe there are managers out there that can do that. Steven Naismith has kind of been either side of the fence when it comes to these fixtures. So I don't know whether that helps him in terms of sort of offering an insight into how to sort of approach these games. But to be fair to him, the two games we had against Celtic and Rangers last season when he was interim manager, there was I would say, good intent from the team to play the right way and try and get a positive result. So hopefully we'll see that continue over the next sort of 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think the picking at a few things there when you talked about the kind of classing as a free hit. That's something that's really it really infuriates me when I hear managers talk about it being a free hit, because playing the Old Firm makes up 6 to 8 games a season. So a good chunk of your season. So if you're writing off between what would be 18 to 24 points a season, very defeatist. And and I think that when you hear managers come out and say that, especially there's managers for sides who are maybe perennially bottom 6, it does feed into that narrative, that mentality that we're just right. If we can get anything from the Old Firm, we're lucky. If we kind of just escape by being competitive, if we can pick up anything on, if we can get a draw, then that's a massive bonus. But I think there's the kind of two sides to it. At Tynecastle, I think Hearts should always trouble Celtic and Rangers by being that kind of up and at them style, just making it very difficult for them, making it a real battle. And then I think that's something that they don't have to do too often, because they have the ball a lot. And then away from home, I think you just need to, like you said, there's a lot of factors. Luck's a big one, but you have to. It's like kind of a scale. I think you need to start off really positively and kind of shock them. Don't let them get into a rhythm straight away, and then after 20 minutes, settle down, get into a good shape, and then look to play in the counter, and then kind of just do that in stages. It's almost like a boxing match. You go at them, and then you kind of stand off. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of facets to it. On Naismith, there was a lot of encouragement from the Celtic game. I thought we played really well against them until Cochrane's sending off. And then you had the game at Ibrox, where I thought it was a really composed performance. My only thing is, I actually thought Naismith, one thing he did wrong was maybe agitate the Rangers crowd and Morelos by getting, or the bench did. They got involved, and then that kind of brought the Ibrox crowd up. That brought Morelos up. He didn't need any encouragement to play against Hearts or score against Hearts, and it's having a bit of fire, but being sensible with it against Old Firm. But I agree with you that over the course of Scottish football, there is definitely there's definitely a mentality issue, and yeah, probably within certain things with using the term a free hit kind of inferiority complex. I'm hopeful that Steven Naismith is the type of personality that can change that, because we've talked about it before. Hearts fans heard it before. The club want to get closer to the Old Firm, so now they need a manager to be able to get across to the players and start delivering more than 8 wins in 60 games or whatever it is.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, we talk about free hit. I think if ever there's a time where we really can, believe that, is just now. Now that you can make the argument that Steven Naismith's tenure at Hearts shouldn't be solely judged on results against the Old Firm, but because we've had such an inconsistent start to the season with what was viewed as quite a favourable run of fixtures at the start, he is now in a position where we can't really come out of those fixtures with 0 points, because fans will then demand action, not because of those 2 results in isolation, but because of where that leaves us after the first round of fixtures, which would be probably bottom 6. So, this next two fixtures, more than any time, is really a time where the club and the team can't just view it as a sort of a potential free hit and just a bonus if we get something out of it.
And then obviously the League Cup semi-final is a whole different level. We've never beaten Rangers at Hampden Park, which is not a positive, that's for sure. But there's ramp up the pressure. You obviously got the Livingston game in between, but even if it's, you look at Celtic, where you play, if you put a really good positive performance, get a draw, go to Ibrox, put in a positive, even a positive performance, get maybe a draw out with them, then there's probably still encouragement there if you can carry on that into Livingston to win. But winning a League Cup semi-final against Rangers at Hampden Park, that's got the capacity to really allow Hearts and Naismith to build something.
Yeah, I would say so. It would certainly. I think, especially if they went on to win the competition, then it does buy him that time. It does buy him that time to sort of implement what he wants to do within the squad. I think it's already becoming quite apparent that there's a lack of trust from him in certain individuals, which I've highlighted on other shows. In terms of, if you look at Halliday, he is certainly persona non grata. I think if you look at Toby Sibbick as a centre half, I don't think there's a lot of trust in there. I think he's only really played that position when it's been the last resort. So I definitely think he's already identifying areas and personnel that he would ideally like to change in time. But unfortunately, with the way football is now, he'll only get that time if he sort of either builds consistently in the league or does something special in the cup competition. So, the semi-final has so much importance on it now, not just for the club, but for him individually, because it really could buy him some time moving into the sort of January sort of transfer window. And then ideally, then he can maybe make some of the changes that he wants to within the squad.
You mentioned the January transfer window there. We got a question then. It was who was I really should have looked this out. It was Jasper, and then loads of number 2808 5554. He asked about Joe Savage, but the recruitment is much more than Joe Savage. I've got an interview with Joe Savage, or interviews with Joe Savage, coming up on the site for the next week. So he explains Maury's role. But do you think the recruitment the last 3 windows has been good enough? Essentially, that's the question. Do you think the recruitment over the last 3 windows has been good enough?
Yeah, I probably don't really want to make a judgment on
this window,
the most recent one.
Yeah,
I think it's fair that those players get 6 to 12 months to kind of show their worth, and especially when there's a new manager in, but there's been a change of style, there's been a change of shape. I do think it'd be unfair to probably write off players at least. I think everyone has shown in spells what they can offer the team. And I think particularly when you look at how Nieuwenhof's progressed over the last month, Kent's been really solid. They're probably the two that you would say could potentially make a case for being in our strongest first 11, sort of moving forward. I think if you go back, though, to the 2 transfer windows from last season, that's where we're still in a position where we're still trying to firefight some of the problems that have been caused by that. And I think you're right. It's not just on Joe Savage. It's very much a collaborative effort between him and his team, and then obviously the manager that's in charge at that time as well. When you look back at January, I think our biggest failing was the fact that we weren't able to get any centre halves in over the line, or at least experienced. I know that they brought in James Hill, who kind of covered there towards the end of the season and had a few decent games, but I think that was probably our biggest failing from that. Now, whether that's down to just one individual or down to the collaborative thing, I'm not too sure. There's obviously been a lot of rumours about Robbie wanting to trim the squad during January, and that potentially was butting heads with maybe what other people were wanting from that window. So that certainly caused a bit of an issue. And James Hill came in and he done a job. Yutaro Oda was always viewed as a bit of a project signing. And then the Garen Cool one was a bit of a strange one in terms of the 6 months. I think if we'd captured them on 18 months, it certainly could have got a bit of value. But 6 months, you always really struggled to see what it was really going to do for us. And again, there's been accusations about that being maybe a bit of a vanity signing. And maybe that's true, but I think
it didn't really help when he was playing centre mid against Rangers. That also didn't help his case.
Yeah, that's just everything just seemed to fall to pieces after that game, didn't it? I think in terms of the summer transfer window from last season, that's where you really see quite a few problems, because that's when we were supposed to be building our squad to be able to, cope with the demands of the sort of 2 fixtures a week. So you've got Forrest and Grant, who generally have been on the periphery for large spells of last season. Now, the Hove came in over the last few weeks and started to add a bit of value, Forrest in particular. So there is still a case to say that they could still come out of this and become sort of permanent fixtures in the team or in the squad. Nielsen's been loaned back out to Partick Thistle this season. Keogh and Snodgrass have both left since they signed last summer. Xander Clark's been a really able deputy, so I think you could qualify that or sort of mark that under this as a successful sort of capture. Kai Rolls is a bit of a strange one. I think at the time that we make the signing, it does make sense to a degree. I know that I think it was Craig Fowler that put up a piece about, the fact that in terms of aerial duels, he really struggled over in the A-League. But I think at the time that we signed him, we were playing with that free. And I think the intent would have been to have played him as the sort of left side of that, where he's aerial duels maybe aren't quite as big a sort of requirement for someone playing in that system. So I do understand why we signed him at the time. I think the whole problem with Kai Rolls' capture has been with the change in shape and changing over to a flat 4. And that's where his form's really sort of tailed off. Given where he played against England during the week and given his performance against Hibs, there could be an argument to say that he could continue to fill in on the left side if Naismith has trust in pairing Sibbick and Kent together. So it'll be interesting to see if we maybe go with that or maybe revert back to a free over the next couple of weeks. I think the only sort of player that leaves is Shankland, who's probably been the out-and-out success of last summer. The only problem that raises, though, is that was definitely a signing that was identified by management and not through the recruitment team. So again, you've got to ask, is the sort of current model under the recruitment really bringing value if you were to look at last summer? So again, this summer, still to be judged, but yeah, I'd say the last 2 transfer windows haven't really went the way that we would have liked to have seen.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. And you made the point about Kai Rolls. The thing that got me with the defence last season, last summer, and then January is you looked at John. So you looked at the defence before. So you had Stephen Kingsley, Craig Halkett, and John Souttar, and then John Souttar left to go to Rangers. But then we brought in Kai Rolls, and so you were essentially left with you could have 3 players there who could play left centre back, and Kai Rolls, Stephen Kingsley, and Alex Cochrane. Whereas you're then kind of playing Kingsley at times in the centre of the back 3. Craig Halkett's moved across to the right of the back 3, whereas Craig Halkett's best position was in the centre of the back 3. And then didn't really seem to be a replacement for Souttar. I don't know if Sibbick was potentially earmarked for that, because we did see him come in. Obviously, he went and came in against Riga at home, and he built his confidence up from there. But yeah, it didn't seem. Kai Rolls, I think there's a really good player there, but I just didn't really see where he fit in when he came in, because you had Kingsley. It was almost like Kingsley played that role. And then you go to January. I think the biggest misstep was not bringing in someone to replicate Craig Halkett, because he was going to miss the rest of the season. And believe it or not, in Scotland, you need someone to head the ball as a centre back. And that's what I thought we missed in the second half of the season, was someone who led the defence, who controlled the defence. And we've seen how well Frankie Kent has come in and done that. And then you look at, you talked about Forrest and Grant, and you're kind of hoping that the guys coming in from UK, like Forrest as well, he knows the league, that they get up to speed a lot quicker, the way that Kent has this season, whereas you're willing to give more time to the likes of Oda, Tagawa, Vargas, Neuenhoff, because they've come from various corners of the world, and not only are they adapting to Scottish football, they're adapting to a new way of life, a new culture. So I'm more hopeful of this window, and the window that just happened is we've identified players, or certainly players in areas where we were weak last season or we needed to fill in. Still not sure we've got enough pace, but when you look at the squad, I think there's a lot of balance. There's a lot of options that for Naismith that allows them to change the formation, to change personnel within games and things like that. So, yeah, I was in hindsight, last season's transfer windows didn't go as planned. I'm more hopeful about this one.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, and we are already seeing what certain players can bring. I think the biggest sort of problem area is probably trying to fit Tagawa and Vargas into our system. But again, that falls back to our whole issue when we're given the majority of the ball in games against some of the teams. So I think that doesn't just fall on their individual quality, because I think you can see on paper what those players can bring. And last season, you look at guys like even Keogh, you can see why Keogh was signed. It just didn't work out. I think they looked at Keogh and thought there's a potential upgrade on Peter Haran there. Didn't quite work out the way everyone wanted. So I think I can always understand on paper what they're trying to do. But unfortunately, there was just too many misses last season. And that's something we can't really see a repeat of this year.
Keogh, I think he did show up. I think he's the type of player that did show up really well on data. Not Hearts are not data led, but they do use that, and as every club should. And spoke to someone in the Netherlands, and the season before he arrived at Hearts, he didn't have the best season, but the season prior, it was really, really effective in the role that we kind of wanted him to do last season. And like I said, yeah, it doesn't work out, and that's a big thing, is that transfers, the best will in the world, there's a good if you can get more than 50% success rate, I think you're doing well. Just that's the nature of the transfer window and signing players to come into your team.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair shout. And again, like you said, you do have to use data. And I know Hearts have been keen in the past to sort of try and understand someone's character before signing them and that as well. So I do think they put in all the work. It just, for some reason, last summer just didn't go the way that it was expected. And I think it was more just getting a balance out of the squad rather than there being issues with the individual merits of the players that they signed. But again, hopefully this year, that will change. And again, I think we've seen enough out of the likes of Neuenhoff and Ken, and to a lesser extent Vargas, to sort of offer some hope that there'll be more hits than misses this year.
Yeah, and the big thing just to reiterate is that when Hearts sign a player, it is always the last person to have a say is the manager, the head coach. So in this case, it was Steven Naismith last season, Robbie Neilson. Moving on to a question from yourself, Scott. This one stumped me. And that's why I wanted to throw it back at you. What is the worst individual performance you have seen for a Hearts player in a winning fixture? There's a few I can reverse in terms of the best individual performance in a losing game, or the worst individual performance in a draw. I can still remember Joe Pereira against Kilmarnock when we drew 3-3 at Tynecastle.
Oh yeah, that trophy one that went right through him.
Yes, yeah, I was watching that in a hotel room in Munich, and I think it was that moment where we drew 3-3. I was like, we're getting relegated. Even if even this season continued, we were getting relegated.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to the question, the reason I raised it is because you do find that the conversation tends to centre around the opposite of that. People will talk about Neil McCann in the League Cup final in '96. One of the ones I always remember is Suso's performance second half at Brockville in the League Cup game when we lost 4-3, where he was just a man possessed. So you do get examples of that. I think the two that spring to mind though straight away when I think about poor performances in a winning game, one of them's Kevin Twaddle in the 5-1 game against Hibs. Newcastle. So I think it needs to be said that it's now very well documented that Kevin was having personal problems at the time, which he's outlined in his own book, and he's been very public about that. But it was this weird set of circumstances. Everyone knew that Kevin was a big Hearts fan when he signed for the club. This was technically his debut. And he came on for Steven Simmons early in the second half. So I think at that stage we were only 2-1 up. I think Ian Murray had just scored for Hibs. Steven Simmons was walking a tightrope because he'd been booked early on in the game. and there was a very muted applause when he came on, and it was a strange atmosphere. It really was the strangest sort of reaction I've seen from a Hearts crowd to a new player coming in. It was almost as if there was a bit of a mistrust for the fans to begin with. Now, the surface was really, really slippery that day. And I think the first couple of passes that came his way, one went right under his foot. He then, and it just sort of, tailed off of there. And it's strange. You think back to that game, we win 5-1. You get one player who gets man of the match, even although another player scores 4 goals. And then you get a guy making his debut. And there was almost stages where he was starting to get booed a little bit. So although I think it's fair to say that there's a few factors to fall into it, ultimately it was still a poor performance, and albeit a winning game. I think the other one that springs to mind is Thiago Costa.
It was just
for Hearts as a right back when we defeated Inverness 4-1. Obviously, everyone remembers Andrew Driver getting his first goal for the club, Pinilla getting his first goal for the club as well. But Thiago Costa was really poor that day. I think he gets caught at the back post for the equalising goal for Inverness, and he just didn't look, going forward, he wasn't too bad, but he didn't look like someone who would fit into a sort of flat back 4. And I think he was away from the club about 2 months later. I remember him playing a couple of reserve games, but getting sent off against Hibs and that as well. So they're the two that always spring to mind. I'm sure there's other examples that other people could come up with, but they're the two that always stick in my head.
There's the ones came into my mind, but the Thiago Costa was actually just typing out his name to see, because I thought he played in the Inverness game, and there was I can't remember where I heard this rumor, so I've never had it backed up, but apparently there was made a mess of his contract, and gave him far too much money than a player of his caliber deserves. So I don't know how much truth is in that. No, around that time, it's very believable. It's one of those where you can say anything around that era, and you're thinking there's a good chance that could have happened. The other one I was thinking of was Juho Michaela came off the bench in a 3-2 win over Motherwell in Shaba Laszlo's first game.
Oh, that's right. He loses the ball, leading up to the Motherwell goal.
Yes. Miko ended up scoring the winner late on, and I remember Laszlo coming marching on at the pitch and remonstrating with Michaela. I was like, well, that's him done. He's never played for Hearts again, because as soon as your manager gives you a bollocking like that in front of 17,000 Hearts fans after winning a game, there's a good chance you are never going to be seen again.
Yeah, that's a good shout. There is always that thing. There's that everlasting memory of our winning goal. I think it's Michael Stewart that plays the ball through, and Michaela nearly gets in the way of it. And you can just sort of see Michael Stewart almost sort of motioning as if to say, get out of the way. He's another one. You talk about contracts with Thiago Costa. Obviously, the big rumour with Michaela was that he was on $5,000 a goal bonus. So when he scored a hat-trick at Alloa that night, I think the board pretty much told management not to pick him again.
That was fine, because there was a good chance he was ever scoring again. So
yeah, you could be there all day if you talk about some of the contracts that were being handed to players, especially when Pedro Lopez was in charge of the negotiations. But yeah, those were the two that came up in my mind. But I'm always happy to hear what other people can come up with.
And finally, kind of touching on that, I think it was Matthew Leslie put this in. While Vladimir Romanov is rightly criticised with how he ran and then left the club, doesn't the root of 2013 admin lie with Chris Robinson, whose feelings are forgotten in the light of Vlad, who mismanaged HMFC to such a dire state that left us open to a predator like Romanov?
Look, this is a great question, and I think you could probably make a one-off episode on this question alone.
Yeah, we might just do that.
I think what's really strange about the psyche when people sometimes compare Robinson and Romanov is that you get a lot of fans who will make the statement of, well, it was a roller coaster. We got 2 Scottish Cups out of it. We got to stay at Tynecastle. But very seldom do you hear fans say, under Robinson, we won the Scottish Cup. We built 3 stands, and we also finished 2 years running under Levine. Now, I understand where the contempt comes from when it comes to Chris Robinson, because my own personal belief is that he was vastly incompetent, and probably even worst of all, he was very stubborn, and he sort of tended to stick to grudges. You know, him and Jeffries didn't get on for quite a large spell during his sort of first spell at the club as well. And I think when you look at Robinson in terms of his aptitude, in terms of making money or losing money at the club, I think the story that sort of highlights his naivety and his stubbornness is probably the SMG debacle. So obviously you go back to 1999, SMG offer us 8 million. The first 4 million gets converted into stock straight away. Now, at that time, our share price was sitting at about £1.50. Now, I remember my dad buying shares right after the Scottish Cup win. Now, I don't think any Hearts fan legitimately bought shares thinking that they were going to trade it and make money further down the line. No one was making that projection. It was just an emotional attachment to the club, and it was just a bit of fun, if nothing else. Chris Robinson, however, seemed to believe that our stock could only go upwards. So when we made that deal with SMG, there was a caveat that the other 4 million could be converted into stock 4 years later. Now, Chris Robinson seemed to steadfastly believe that they would do that. The problem was, you get to 2003 and our stock had dropped down to, I think it was 20p at that time. So SMG were well within their rights to say, well, no, you can repay us that money back. And by the way, there's a 4% interest on top of that money as well. So you look at examples like that and you just think he was just out of his depth. You know, the club were pretty much in debt from the moment that him and Leslie Deans bought the share, you know, the majority shareholding over for Wallace Mercer back in 94. I think within weeks of them acquiring the club, we were looking to, you know, sell Alan McLaren. And, you know, we were pretty aggressive in making sure that that deal went through. So I think there was money problems from the offset. And to be fair to Robinson, this was a time in which the culture of Scottish football was to speculate to accumulate. You know, there was a lot of chairmen overspending, spending inflated wages to bring in overseas players to try and sort of help sort of acquire these big TV deals that were being offered by Sky towards the end of that decade. So you can maybe give them a bit of leeway in terms of that. But I always think of that SMG example and think that really told you everything you needed to know about his business acumen. Now, the way that he handled that didn't help either. He obviously then started to look into the proposal of moving out to Strayton and actually maybe ground sharing with Hibs at one stage. Now, when he was asked if this was any way in which it tied down to the SMG money, he steadfastly refused. And what he then decided to do was come up with a not fit for purpose tagline with Tynecastle. And the narrative was then that, you know, under UEFA standards, we needed to move away from Tynecastle. We needed to do this. Now, some people could make the argument that to a degree, Tynecastle isn't fit for purpose because we can't really extend on what we've got. And we've currently got a waiting list for season ticket holders. So you could go back to that and say, maybe there's an argument to say that to a degree it isn't fit for purpose. But certainly moving to Murrayfield wasn't the best alternative. So I can understand why people like Matthew would probably say the rot had set in at that stage. And I think that's a fair assumption. But I do think if you're going to suggest that under Romanov, it was great because it was a roller coaster and we got 2 cups about it. So it kind of, in the end, it all worked out well. I think you also have to apply that rule to Robinson's tenure and say, Scottish Cup, 3 stands built, and a couple of third placings under Levine as well. So I think you've got to kind of give him that leeway. But generally speaking, yeah, in terms of the rot setting in financially, it was definitely under his stewardship.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. A lot of stuff I didn't really know. I think I was only really aware, just my age, about Robinson when it became Save Our Hearts, or Keep Hearts at Tynecastle, and I just always found he just kind of had no time for the fans, and obviously there was protests, and he got maybe there was. You might have argued that it went OTT some of the stuff that happened to Robinson, but I always felt like he just treated the fans with contempt. And then around Tynecastle, he's like he knew best. And the big thing for me was always look back to Romanoff. It's not splitting Old Firm and the 2 cups, but it was staying at Tynecastle, I think, was absolutely massive.
Yeah, and you're right in what you mentioned about Robinson. There was a along with the sort of incompetence financially, there was a bit of a personality problem as well, and that clashed with the fans. I think it was back at the '96 Scottish Cup final. There was quite a bit of an issue. Some of the fans were unhappy with how the tickets had been allocated, and Robinson's way of firefighting this potential PR disaster was to come out and call fans parasites. So
Yes.
he didn't help himself. I remember a reserve fixture back in 2000 where we were playing Hibs, and I think we were both up the top end of the league at that time. So they were actually expecting quite a big crowd. For some reason, Hearts deemed it worthy of putting Hibs in the Roseburn end and Hearts in the old main stand, which had a lower capacity than the Roseburn at that time. And it was decision making like that where you just thought, who's calling these shots? Who's making these decisions? So all these Hearts fans turned up en masse to the main stand. They let too many people in, which meant they had to try and get fans out of the main stand. And I've just got this memory of Chris Robinson standing at the gate as you can sort of turn round into the Gorgie Road end for Cloud Street. And he's standing there, the gate's closed, and he's sort of turning around to fans saying, well, you'll need to pay again. And he just had this way, and it was only £1 to get in or something that night. He just had this way of just not dealing with the fans, when things were going wrong. And again, that's what always sort of came up and sort of hindered him when it came to the AGMs. He never knew how to handle fans. He never knew how to sort of deal with criticism. And, that probably hurt him just as much as the financial sort of handling of a lot of the situations. But yeah, I mean, you could wax lyrical about this for hours on end. There's so many stories regarding Robinson. And then you've obviously got the Romanov stuff as well.
I mean, Romanov, that's a year's worth of content right there. Everybody, that's gone. Thank you very much, Scott. That we'll finish up there. We have rambled on more than enough, and we will no doubt do this again very shortly. We've got a couple of questions that I think we are going to do separate episodes on. One on Craig Levein, one on Stephen Presley. So divisive characters within the Heart support, but I think lend themselves much more to their own episode because there's a lot of context that requires given. But yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening, and be sure to check heartstandard.co.uk for all the latest. The third part of Malevev's interim spell goes up this afternoon, so be sure to check that out. Goodbye.